Thank you so much, guys. This is the biggest alpha talk. Alpha, you can get the maximum alpha out of this talk, actually. Because privacy is the talk of the town, and if you knew anybody who's working in privacy, anybody respectable who's working in privacy, ask them what is the best privacy solution out there in the market. And if 8 out of 10 people don't tell you that it's Miden is the best one, then you can think of myself as a liar. Like Miden is that high respected in the community. And Miden, of course, Bobbin is previously co-founder at Polygon. So we started Miden inside of Polygon. We realized that this is such a big initiative. This will be a new chain, new VM. Everything is new required for it. And so that's why it deserves to be its own project, right? Which is connected to the ag layer and everything. And so Bobbin, like just a small introduction about Bobbin, that Bobbin is one of the 3-4 key leaders from the Facebook's or the Meta's Libre team. Like back in the day, there was the Facebook Libre team, and 3 of them, those top researchers, they came out and they did their own projects when Libre was shut down. One of them is Sui, the founder of Sui, who worked with Bobbin before. Then second one is Aptos, and third one is Miden, right? Like third one is with Bobbin. And Bobbin is so privacy oriented that a cool thing is Bobbin is not his real name.
You're doxing me a little bit.
It's not his real name. Like, he's like a privacy, cypherpunk and all that. So I'm really glad to have Bobbin with me on stage. And I want him to talk more about Miden. So Bobbin, what is Miden and why should people care?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the awesome introduction. This feels like home, by the way, so very excited to be here and talking to you guys. I think, so Miden, in a nutshell, it's a privacy chain, right? So I think privacy is super important. There are a couple of aspects, and we'll get into that. But when I first got into the blockchain space, I was very excited about the tech. I think that was revolutionary technology. But for me, I immediately saw that there are 2 big issues with blockchains, and this was back in 2017, where I didn't think they could scale. Like Bitcoin, I was read the white paper, and 6 transactions per second. There's not enough to do anything. And second, there is no privacy. And I was like, unless we can get both privacy and scalability, there is just no way this can get to mass adoption. And so for me, privacy was something that I was thinking even way back then. Now the path to get here was, windy, because I was not a cryptographer, so I didn't know anything about how to get privacy. I was actually a little bit depressed in the beginning because I was like, okay, blockchains are awesome, but I don't know how they would actually work. And then I learned about ZK proofs. And this was the time where actually it all clicked for me, and I was like, okay, now I think I know how to make them work. And so I took time to learn about ZK. I took the time to figure out how to build the protocols. A lot of that happened while I was at Polygon. That was the part where a lot of the research and understanding came together. But I think a lot of this also happened at Facebook, by the way. The first performance start prover was built at, the Winterfell was built at Facebook. And so for me, this path of building this privacy-focused chain, but also that can scale and all of that stuff, that was basically my understanding of how the blockchain should work. So Miden, again, is a privacy chain. We're taking the approach where we think the next wave of adoption is institutions. And so Miden is focused on this financial use case with institutions specifically, and specifically from privacy and compliance standpoint. Because I think for institutions especially, there's a cyberpunk approach where privacy is your personal right and all of that, and this is very important. But also for institutions, you need compliance, and you need to be able to marry the 2 somehow. Otherwise, this is also not going to work.
Absolutely. And Bobbin, about privacy, back in the day, I don't know whether you remember or not, but you had given an internal presentation where you talked about 3 stages of privacy. And I love talking about those 3 stages of privacy, because privacy is also a spectrum. It's not like one single point. So I would love if you can talk to everybody about that framework that you shared internally.
Yeah, definitely. So there are different, as Sandeep said, levels of privacy. I would actually add the 4th one to that as well. So the first level, although the difference between the third one and the fourth one is fairly minor. But the first one is what we have in blockchains today, which is zero privacy for the most part. Maybe there are some exceptions, but for the most part, we have zero privacy. Everything is transparent. A lot of people, up until recently, didn't realize this actually. Like right now, the privacy narrative is picking up, and people are understanding that blockchains are not really private. But the idea is that this is an immutable ledger that is there for all eternity for everybody to see in a transparent way. This is like a very big problem. And this is like what we have right now, transparent, full transparency, no privacy. Second level is what I call the Web 2 privacy. This is what you have with your bank. This is what you have with PayPal, where you don't see everybody's transactions, but there is some authority that sees those transactions. This is like the Web 2 level of privacy. And then you have this like the next level of privacy, which is more kind of like strong privacy, which is similar to what Zcash, for example, is doing, where people, only you and I see that we've transacted, but nobody else can see. There is no other authority. And then you can go even stronger than that. Like you can say like nobody can see what's going on. Like you wouldn't know necessarily that I sent you money, for example. It could be used for donations and things like that. And so those are different levels of privacy. I would say one of the points, and I made it yesterday as well at one of the talks, is that people frequently think about privacy as binary, as you said, like where either we have transparency or we have like absolute privacy where nobody can see anything. And I don't think it's like that. And it's in real world doesn't work like that. Like I think nobody would object that we would say transferring $100 should be fully private. Like nobody should see necessarily how you transfer $100. But if I'm sending $1 million or $1 billion, like I don't think a lot of people would argue that that transaction should be fully private, where nobody sees how $1 billion is being sent. And so there is still a lot of work to do in terms of figuring out what is the right place, both on the technology side and on the kind of like social, regulatory, and other sides, how to draw the line. But I do think of privacy as a spectrum, which is some things are okay to be private, and some things may not be as okay to be private.
Yeah, and you talked about something called compliant privacy back in the day, right? And I would love to hear from you. Like, what do you think? What do you think of compliant privacy? And like, I have a follow-up question like on that, but first you finish that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, like compliant privacy is really important for institutions, especially, right? Because if you operate a business, you usually operate under jurisdictions of some country or some legal or some kind of organization or whatever. And at that point, like, I don't know of any business or financial institution that says I don't care about compliance for many other reasons. And for them being able to say, okay, we're going to still preserve privacy, but we're going to make sure we're compliant. I think there are different ways to be compliant, right? There is voluntary compliance, which works like this. There is and I think voluntary compliance, we have the tools, like ZK is a perfect tool to give the voluntary compliance where you say, I've, complied with a certain set of rules, but I don't need to reveal all the information that went into that. This is a perfect use case where you say, okay, I can choose to comply with rules without making my data publicly available to regulators and whoever else. I think there's also a question of involuntary compliance, and that's a much more complicated question where, should the protocol be able to enforce some things on users without them wanting to enforce, kind of be imposed on this. And this is, again, I think here people usually get binary, where they say either, you get full privacy, you don't get privacy at all. And here as well, I do think that, even though the conversation is much more difficult, but we can come up with tools and all of that stuff to make it a scale rather than a binary choice.
I see. So in this compliant privacy mode, like I remember that you were saying that initially you want to launch Miden as a single sequencer, chain. So in the single sequencer chain, if I'm not wrong, I think you were saying is that if like you will be able to see, the operator actually sees who's doing what transactions. It's like a bank, but you don't disclose it to anyone. But if a regulatory body comes to you and says that, okay, show me these transactions, and so you will be able to selectively reveal them, right? So my question is like, first of all, is it like this? Second, how do you think that the crypto community will take it?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, yes, it is like this. So we're launching as a centralized L2, and as a centralized L2, we will operate the network in such a way where we will see all the details for the initial period of time, and then people will be private against each other. This is kind of what close to this Web 2 level of privacy that I mentioned before. Now, this is a temporary kind of state. We do want to end up to a state where there is more privacy. Now, why do we do it this way? One of the reasons for this is kind of regulatory environment. Like, we want to take this couple of years to understand, first of all, we want to make sure that Miden is not used for nefarious purposes, like North Koreans trying to launder money through Miden. That would be way more complicated or impossible to do if we are seeing all the transactions. Second, it gives us time to figure out like what is the right approach from this compliant privacy as well, like what is accepted by the regulators, what they're looking for, how can you marry this voluntary and involuntary compliance if there is a good approach to that. So this gives us time to both on the technology side and on the social and regulatory legal side to figure out how exactly this should work in the end state. And I think it also, like the important thing, by the way, it's not only about regulation and things like that, it's also about security, right? ZK systems are incredibly complex. Like it's very easy to miss a bug and things like that. And then the privacy system, without this kind of training wheels, it is very risky to launch with like full privacy right away. Because if there is a bug, you won't even be able to see it. Like if privacy is working, you won't even be able to see it. This allows us and gives us time to make sure we battle test the network well enough where we're sure that there are no issues or underlying bugs that could jeopardize the network. So again, this like initial period gives us time to figure out security and safety on the technology side, and it gives us time to figure out the appropriate way to give people more privacy in the longer term, at the same time building the protocol in such a way that is threat resistant and doesn't allow people to launder billions of dollars.
So in the initial phase, Miden will have some sort of this operator trusted privacy, that you are trusting the operator, that operator is not going to disclose anything. Just like you work with any other single sequencer L2, you are trusting the operator that they are not going to steal the money and blah, blah, blah.
Well, so to be clear, this is not about stealing the money. This is just the privacy part.
I know. I was just giving the analogy of the single sequencer L2s. But then what is the next stage? And I'm curious about, like, once you enable the next stage, then how does the compliance privacy still get preserved? Because I'm guessing in the next stage, even you don't know.
Yeah, so next stage, there are some things that we know and some things that we need to figure out. Like what we know is that we will build like the accounts where voluntary compliance will be super easy. Like the way we're working, we have partnerships with teams in the space like OpenZeppelin, for example, building a private state management. We're working with Predicate as another example, which is like imposing, can plug in the compliance checks into things. So if people opt in into being compliant, that is going to be very easy. The involuntary part is a bit more tricky. I have some ideas of how this is going to work, but and these ideas are based, for example, you can say, as I mentioned, if you're transferring a small amount, you are fully private. There is no kind of other conditions. If you're transferring large amounts, maybe you need to encrypt it in such a way where if, let's say, 1/3 of the validators come together, they can decrypt your transaction later on. So if there is like a extreme event, the network can go and decrypt like large transactions. Again, this is like pure speculation right now.
Maybe like one idea that I'm just getting right, like live is that, maybe there's some sort of like governance or some sort of like, privacy committee-based stuff where there are like 10 people in the committee, and if there is a regulated body like FBI or CIA, like not CIA, FBI or not CIA, FBI or like, some other, kind of regulatory body comes to you, SEC comes to you, income tax comes to you, at that time, that committee can give a temporary key to that agency that, okay, you are allowed to look into these 5, 6, 10 transactions.
It's possible, but it gets tricky if you do it this way because, like, as soon as you tie to a specific country, then, does this committee respond only to FBI? Does it respond to like a Chinese government? Does it respond to Russian government as well?
Wow.
And so I think the idea is probably going to be something like it's a governance at the level of the chain, but it needs to be more kind of like, this is a validator set, and you need to convince like 1/3 of the validators to be, or whatever the number is.
The DAO members actually, like they all have to sign some sort of threshold
exactly.
key.
So like, and again, there is a lot of research that still needs to be done to make sure there are no holes and it works correctly. But I think we can do it in such a way where, 99% of people get privacy by default, and like there is maybe a small set of use cases where there's extra precautions needed, where you require some extra things where you need to do like not even permission, but like reveal your transactions to a small set of people, like if you're doing really high value transactions.
Yeah, I think that's like the that's like the holy grail of a privacy blockchain. Like if you can find a place where you can still uphold all the cypherpunk values, but you also have like an ability that if an regulatory body wants to get into some transactions, they can get into it, right? Without having a central party having all the control to give, right? This is kind of the holy grail.
Yes, yes. I think, I mean, once and if we solve this problem, I think it would be a very, like again, privacy, I do believe it's like a fundamental thing that needs to be there. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. But at the same time, we live in a real world, and we need to make sure that, you know, it's not that easy to launder $1 billion. I like to like make an analogy to cash, right? So like cash is a very private system where if you and I engage in a transaction, nobody else knows about it. But cash, unlike blockchains, has a nice property that it is like, it's very easy to make small value transactions, but if I want to transfer $1 billion in cash, that becomes much more complicated. And like transferring $1 billion in cash, you know, you still have like, the cash has this nice property where it is good enough for law enforcement to be able to track and like figure out that, you know, transferring $1 billion involves a lot of steps that make it tricky for criminals to transfer $1 billion in cash, while normal people and regular people can just transact privately with small amounts.
But with this, with blockchain transactions, don't you think that I can simply break down that $1 billion transaction into 1,000 smaller transactions?
So that's part of the research. Like you need to figure out how to handle this, and one of the ways to handle it is have an identity system where you have some identity that says, okay, you can't create a 10 million symbols of yourself. Now, creating such an identity system is also challenging because you know you want to make sure it's permissionless enough where people even who don't have like passports and things like that can obtain this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like Sybil resistant enough so that you can't create like, you know, if you can create like a few copies of yourself, that's fine. Nobody minds. But you shouldn't be able to create like thousands and millions of copies of yourself. That's the bigger, like, and if we can solve that problem, I know how to make a really good privacy system.
Yeah. And what do you think about the Zcash right now picking up? Because Zcash is extreme, right? Zcash has, like, if, let's say, a North Korean entity, Lazarus Group, let's say, does a very big hack, they move all that money now with this near intents and all that, right? They move it to Zcash. After that, it's lost. Nobody can do anything about it, right? Do you think that right now we are seeing so much about Zcash, and I'm also a big Zcash bull in a way, but I feel that the moment there is a big enough hack that happens and the regulatory bodies figure out that they can't do anything about it, they are going to bring, you know, the similar kind of restrictions that they brought in last time, like in the last cycle, 2022.
I mean, first of all, I'm very happy that Zcash is getting a lot of attention. I think it's well deserved. The team is awesome, and they've built some of the best tech in the industry, and like they were true pioneers. For me, like one of the moments when I like really blockchain industry clicked for me is when I saw like Zcash launch, because this is like putting like something that was purely theoretical into like real production use case. I do think there is a big risk. Like Tornado Cash was a fine protocol that operated fine until North Koreans started to launder money through it, right?
Yeah.
If North Koreans didn't try to launder, if Lazarus didn't launder money through North Korea, it probably would have been operating and nobody would have, touched the founders and all of that stuff. Now we can say that like, okay, probably founders shouldn't have been touched at all. Like publishing code should not be considered a crime, and I believe that fully. But at the same time, like it did attract attention because of the hacks, and if the hack happens in another system, it will be, I mean, for Zcash, there may be some like on-ramps and off-ramps that can still like near intents, maybe you can stop it at that level, but I don't know enough to be able to say intelligent things about this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, that's why I have a little bit of that worry on Zcash. Like right now, Zcash has crazy momentum, but then the moment there is one or two large incidents like this happen, and then, you know, few regulatory bodies line up, and that will make it very, very difficult. But I think
I would say that the regulatory environment now is a bit different as well. So maybe it's not going to be as bad because there is much more understanding, and you know, at that time I think there was a concentrated effort to like shut down.
Yeah. No, 100%. But I'm saying like if the offense is big enough, and then you know that even like the current regulatory regime, somebody like some regulatory FBI goes to them that this is like a terrorist funding, and we have absolutely no way to track it. I think even the current regime is going to say that, okay, this is too much, right? So this might happen.
It's possible.
Yeah, but hopefully by that time, Miden, like, you know, compliant privacy is there, so for other people, because what will happen is if somebody will do a bad thing on Zcash, you know, gets into this trouble, and all the normal, genuine people who wanted, you know, who were using Zcash for proper privacy their individual sovereignty, they will also not be able to use it. But hopefully, at that time, Miden will be able to use it. And I always say that I have this slogan, and I'm going to keep tweeting about it, that, people say that, Zcash is private Bitcoin, right? So I say, like, if Zcash is private Bitcoin, Miden is private Ethereum, because it has programmability also. And you might want to talk about, like, people can build complex
Yeah, so like I think the
that.
programmability aspect is super important for this specific compliance and like being able to run specific checks that are important. I think I want to say one other thing. The Miden that doesn't frequently come up is also post-quantum resistant. So you have a cryptography that will last for a long time. Like even with the advent of quantum computers and things like that, Miden, we're using a different proving system. And yes, other systems probably can upgrade to that over time, but we have built Miden with the understanding that we want it to last for long term. We're taking steps and it like incremental in building, but the foundation is such where it's quantum resistant, it like will have an extremely strong level of privacy, and we will try to figure out how to make it work both for regular people, but also to make it so that it's not easy to launder money through Miden.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the most fun part about, for me, about Miden also, that on Zcash you can do simply BTC-like payments, but on Miden you can do Ethereum-like smart contracts. And that too, you can have client-side proving full privacy for clients, and the applications can interact to some extent with each other. So I think we have our time up. Thank you so much, Bobbin, for being here.
Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, everyone.
Absolute honor to host you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.